As Richard followed them into the house he'd once called home, he realized this was just the beginning. The hardest part wasn't showing up. It would be proving to his family that he was truly ready to change, to make amends, to be the father and man he should have been all along. The door closed behind them, and with it, the first chapter of their reunion began. Inside the living room, the air felt heavy with 15 years of unspoken words. Richard's eyes wandered over the family photos covering the walls. Graduations, birthdays, sports events, all moments he'd missed. His chest tightened as he noticed how in each photo, Diana stood proudly beside their sons, filling the space where he should have been. Peter made coffee in silence, the familiar routine seeming to steady his nerves. Alan perched on the edge of the sofa, his fingers drumming restlessly against his knee. Diana remained standing, arms crossed, a protective barrier between her and the man who had walked away. "You didn't make it to Peeper's high school graduation," Diana finally broke the silence. He was valedictorian. Richard's shoulders slumped. "I know. I read about it in the local paper online. You've been checking up on us." Alan's voice carried a sharp edge. "Every week," Richard admitted, accepting the coffee cup Peter handed him. "I followed everything I could find. Peter's scholarship to MIT, Alan's startup company, Christopher's art exhibitions. Following us online doesn't make you a father," Peter said quietly, settling into an armchair. "Where were you when Mom worked double shifts to pay for my college applications? When Alan had his car accident sophomore year? When Christopher struggled with anxiety?" The questions hit Richard like physical blows. He set down his untouched coffee, his hands shaking slightly. "I was building my company, telling myself I was doing it for all of you, that once I made it big, I'd come back and make everything right." He laughed bitterly. "I became a billionaire, but I lost something worth so much more." Diana's expression softened slightly, not with forgiveness, but with something like pity. "You always did think money could fix everything." "I don't think that anymore," Richard said. "The tumor, it's made me see things differently. Time isn't money. Time is everything." Alan leaned forward. "How long?" The businessman in him wanted facts, figures, concrete details. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. Richard met his son's eyes. "But I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because I finally understand what matters, and I want to try to build something with you all before." He trailed off, unable to finish. Peter stood abruptly, pacing the room. "You know what I remember most about you leaving? Not the day you left. I barely remember that. I remember Mom crying in the kitchen late at night when she thought we were asleep. I remember making up stories about where you were to tell Christopher's kindergarten class. I remember Alan refusing to play baseball anymore because that was our thing." The memories poured out, years of pain-finding voice. Diana watched her eldest son, tears streaming silently down her face. Alan's composed facade cracked further, his own memories rising to the surface. "Remember when I broke my arm?" Alan spoke up. "I was 12. The doctor asked for family medical history, and I couldn't answer half the questions because I didn't know anything about your side of the family. Mom didn't know either." Richard pulled out his wallet, hands trembling, and removed a worn photograph. "I kept this with me. All of you at the beach, the summer before I left. Christopher was building sandcastles. Peter was teaching Alan to surf." His voice broke. "I looked at it every day, telling myself I'd come back when I had enough money to give you the life you deserved." "We didn't need money," Diana said softly. "We needed a father, a husband. Someone to share the burden of raising 3 boys into men. Someone to love us more than their ambitions." The sound of a car door slamming made them all turn. Through the window, they saw Christopher returning, his face still angry but his steps hesitant as he approached the house. "He's so much like you," Diana murmured. "Stubborn, passionate, afraid of being hurt. He took your leaving the hardest because he had the fewest memories to hold on to." The front door opened slowly, and Christopher stood in the doorway, his artist's eyes taking in the scene before him. The anger on his face warred with curiosity and hurt. "If you're staying," he said directly to Richard, "you need to know something. We're not the family you left. We're stronger now because we had to be. If you want to be part of our lives, you have to accept that you're not fixing anything. You're starting over from scratch." Richard nodded, understanding the wisdom in his youngest son's words. "I'd like that chance," he said, "to start over. to learn who you've all become, to try to earn a place in your lives, however small. Diana moved to stand beside Christopher, placing a hand on his shoulder. "One day at a time," she said, her voice firm. "No promises, no expectations. Just one day at a time." As the afternoon light filtered through the windows, the family began the slow, careful process of sharing their stories. There were tears, moments of anger, glimpses of humor, and beneath it all, a tentative thread of hope. They weren't healing, not yet, but they were beginning to understand that sometimes the hardest journeys start with simply opening the door. A week after Richard's return, the family gathered in the upscale restaurant he'd chosen for dinner. The private dining room felt too formal, too forced, but it was neutral ground. Christopher sat as far from Richard as possible, while Peter and Alan maintained their cautious middle ground. Diana had almost declined to come, but her protective instinct toward her sons won out. "Before we order," Richard said, straightening in his chair, "I want to explain why I asked you all here." He pulled out 5 manila envelopes, placing them on the table. "These contain trust fund documents. I've set aside significant portions of my wealth for each of you, including you, Diana." The silence that followed was deafening. Diana's hand clenched around her water glass. "Is this what you think we want?" Christopher's voice trembled with anger. "You think you can buy your way back into our lives?" "No, that's not," Richard started, but Alan cut him off. "Let's hear him out," the middle son said, ever the pragmatist. "These could help secure our futures, regardless of how we feel about him." Peter studied his father's face. "There's more to this than just money, isn't there?" Richard nodded, grateful for his eldest son's perception. "The trusts are unconditional. They're yours whether you want a relationship with me or not. But I'm also offering something else. Peter, I know you're developing new medical technology. My company's resources could help bring it to market faster. Alan, your startup could benefit from my connections in Silicon Valley. Christopher, I've seen your artwork online. I could introduce you to gallery owners who could launch your career." "And what about me?" Diana asked quietly. "What are you offering besides money to make up for 15 years of single parenthood?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Richard set down the papers he'd been holding, his hands shaking slightly. "For you, Diana, I offer the hardest thing of all, my complete honesty. About why I left, about my fears, about my failures, and an admission that you were the strongest one of all of us. You built this family while I was chasing empty dreams." Christopher scoffed, but there were tears in his eyes. "Mom doesn't need your honesty. She needed you there when she was working 2 jobs to put food on our table." "You're right," Richard agreed, surprising them all. "That's why the trust for Diana is the largest. It can't make up for what I did, but it can ensure she never has to worry about money again." Peter leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "What happens to all this if we say no? If we take the money but want nothing to do with you?" "Then that's what happens," Richard said simply. "The money is yours. The opportunities are available if you want them. I'm not trying to buy your love or forgiveness. I'm trying to give you choices I should have given you years ago." Alan picked up his envelope, examining the contents with a businessman's eye. "These are legitimate. No strings attached, no hidden clauses." Diana watched her son's reactions, Peter's cautious interest, Alan's practical assessment, Christopher's internal struggle. She remembered countless nights of budget planning at the kitchen table, the guilt of telling her boys they couldn't afford new clothes or school trips. "I have one condition," she said, her voice steady. "If, and it's a big if, we accept this, you need to understand something. These boys are not projects for you to manage. They're not investments to develop. They're human beings who grew up wondering why they weren't enough to make their father stay." Richard's face crumpled at her words. "I know. And I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to show them that they were always enough. I was the one who wasn't enough of a father." Christopher stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. But instead of leaving, he moved to the window, staring out at the city lights. "I always thought if you came back, I'd hate you forever," he said quietly. "But now, I just feel tired. Tired of being angry, tired of wondering why." Peter joined his younger brother at the window. "Maybe that's the point. We don't have to decide everything tonight. We can take the financial security Mom deserves, think about the rest." Alan nodded, adding his practical perspective. "The opportunities he's offering could help us achieve our goals faster. We can accept that without accepting him, at least for now. Diana looked at her 3 sons, proud of the men they'd become despite, or perhaps because of, their father's absence. Then she looked at Richard, seeing not the ambitious young man who'd left them, but a tired, sick man trying to make amends before it was too late. One day at a time, she repeated her words from their first meeting. We'll take the security you're offering, Richard. Not because we forgive you, but because these boys deserve every opportunity. What happens beyond that, we'll see. Richard nodded, relief and sadness mingling in his expression. As the waiter arrived with their meals, the family settled into an uneasy truce. The envelopes sat in the center of the table, a bridge between past and future, between hurt and healing, between what was lost and what might possibly be found again. The rest of the dinner passed with careful conversation, moments of awkward silence, and brief glimpses of the family they might have been. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are all we can hope for when trying to rebuild what time and choices have broken. 2 weeks after the dinner, tension rippled through the family like a stone dropped in still water. Peter sat in his research lab, staring at the business proposal his father had sent over. The funding could accelerate his medical device development by years, potentially helping thousands of patients sooner, but accepting felt like betraying his mother. Across town, Alan found himself in a similar predicament. His startup's investors were impressed by Richard's interest, doors opening that had been firmly closed before. The younger man's phone buzzed, another message from Christopher, all caps. Are you really going to take his help? The 3 brothers hadn't fought like this since high school. Their unity, forged in their father's absence, was cracking under the pressure of his return. Diana watched it happening, powerless to stop it, her heart breaking all over again. At his hotel suite, Richard reviewed his latest medical results while video chatting with Peter. The treatment's going well, he said, trying to sound optimistic. But let's talk about your project instead. Dad, Peter interrupted, the words still feeling strange on his tongue. I need to know something first. Are you helping because you believe in my work or because you feel guilty? The question hung between them. Richard took off his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. Both, he admitted. I believe in your work. It's brilliant. But yes, I also feel guilty. I should have been there, supporting your dreams from the beginning. Peter's laptop pinged with an incoming message from Alan, family meeting. Tonight, Mom's house. That evening, the kitchen that had been their sanctuary through the hard years became a battleground. Christopher paced, his artist's hands gesturing wildly. He abandoned us. And now you're both just going to take his money, his connections, like nothing happened. It's not that simple, Alan argued, his usual calm slipping. This could change everything for our businesses. We'd be stupid to turn it down. Oh, so now we're stupid for having principles. Christopher shot back. Stop it. Diana's voice cut through their arguing. Look at what he's doing to us again. Dividing us, making us question everything. Peter, who had been quiet, finally spoke. Maybe that's not what he's doing at all. Maybe we're dividing ourselves because for the first time, we have to face our feelings about him individually, not just as a unit. The doorbell rang, startling them all. Richard stood on the porch, looking worse than he had at dinner. The treatment was taking its toll. I heard you were all meeting, he said softly. I thought, maybe I should be here. Face whatever you're feeling directly. Diana almost closed the door, but Christopher surprised everyone by speaking first. Come in. If we're going to fight about you, you might as well witness it. In the kitchen, Richard listened as his sons laid out their conflicts. Peter explained how the medical research funding could save lives. Alan detailed his startup's potential growth. Christopher expressed his fear that accepting help meant excusing the past. I understand all of your positions, Richard said when they finished. But I think you're asking the wrong question. It's not about whether to accept my help. It's about whether you can accept that people can change, that relationships can change without erasing the past. Diana, who had been silent, spoke up. He's right. All eyes turned to her in surprise. I'm angry that it took a terminal diagnosis to bring him back. I'm angry that he thinks money can smooth things over. But I'm most angry that his return is threatening the bonds you boys built without him. Her words struck home. The brothers looked at each other, really looked, seeing the strain their fighting had caused. What if, Peter suggested slowly, we make a pact? We each decide individually about Dad's offers, but we support each other's choices. No judgment, no pressure. Alan nodded. And we meet like this weekly, to check in, to make sure we're still solid with each other. Christopher hesitated, then added, and Dad, if you're going to be part of these meetings, you need to understand. Our relationship with Mom comes first. Always. Richard nodded, emotion thick in his voice. That's exactly how it should be. As the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted. The anger didn't disappear, but it made room for understanding. They ordered pizza. Diana's solution to tense situations, since the boys were small, and somehow, between bites and cautious conversation, they found their way back to steadier ground. Later, watching his family from the kitchen doorway, Richard saw what he'd really lost by leaving. Not just time with his sons, but the chance to be part of this unit that Diana had crafted from the ruins of his abandonment. They were stronger together than any business empire he built, richer in ways his billions couldn't match. As he prepared to leave, Christopher stopped him. I'm still angry, he said bluntly. But I'm going to try to be less angry. For them. He gestured to his brothers and mother. Not for you. Richard accepted this with a nod. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was honest. And maybe honesty, painful as it was, could be the foundation for whatever came next. The brothers walked him out, standing together on the porch like they used to wait for Diana to come home from work. Different now, divided in some ways, but still connected by something stronger than anger or absence or even time itself. 1 month into Richard's return, Diana found herself alone in her garden, tending to the roses she'd planted the year he left. The irony wasn't lost on her. Those bushes had outlasted their marriage, grown stronger in his absence, just like she had. The sound of footsteps made her look up. Richard stood at the garden gate, thinner now from the treatments, but his eyes still held that same intensity she'd fallen in love with decades ago. The boys told me I might find you here, he said softly, still growing the most beautiful roses in the neighborhood. Diana straightened, brushing dirt from her knees. What do you want, Richard? To talk. Just us. No money, no kids, no past. Just talk. She considered refusing, but 20 years of parenting had taught her when to listen. There's another trowel in the toolbox. If we're going to talk, you can help me weed. As they worked side by side, memories flooded back. Sunday mornings in this same garden, planning their future, dreaming about the family they'd have. Before ambition took over, before dreams turned to dust. The boys are accepting your help, Diana said, breaking the silence. Peter's medical project is moving forward. Alan's startup is gaining investors. Even Christopher agreed to that gallery showing. I know. Richard pulled a stubborn weed. But that's not why I'm here. I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone. Diana's hands stilled in the dirt. I'm listening. The night I left, I was terrified. His voice cracked. Not of failing in business. I was terrified of failing you and the boys. Every time I looked at them, I saw all the ways I could mess up their lives. And you were so strong, so capable. I felt redundant. Redundant. Diana's laugh held no humor. I cried myself to sleep for months. The boys needed their father. I needed my husband. How could you not see that? Because I was a coward, he admitted. It was easier to run away, to focus on making money, than to face my fears of not being good enough. The irony is, by running away, I guaranteed I'd fail you all. Diana's hands trembled as she planted new bulbs. Do you know what the hardest part was? Not the money struggles, not the lonely nights. It was watching our boys try to understand why they weren't enough to make their father stay. I know, Richard whispered. I see it in their eyes every time they look at me, especially Christopher's. He's so much like you, Diana said softly. That's why he's fighting the hardest against forgiving you. He's afraid of becoming you. They worked in silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of gardening acing the tension between them. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Richard finally said. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know something. Every success, every milestone, every billion in my bank account, none of it ever filled the hole left by walking away from you and the boys. Diana sat back on her heels, studying the man she'd once built her life around. The designer clothes couldn't hide his illness-ravaged frame, but his eyes held something new. Humility, perhaps, or wisdom bought at too high a price. "You know what I did with my trust fund?" she asked suddenly. "I set up scholarships for single parents going back to school, because someone did that for me when you left. It's how I finished my degree." Richard's eyes filled with tears. That's perfect. That's exactly who you are. Taking pain and turning it into something beautiful, like this garden." "Life goes on," Diana said simply. "We grow, we adapt, we bloom where we're planted." The boys learned that too. They're strong because they had to be, kind because they know how hurt feels, successful because they saw me never give up. A cool breeze rustled the rose bushes, carrying the sweet scent of blooms mixed with earth. In the distance, they could hear the neighborhood children playing, reminding them of when their own boys were small. "I have one request," Diana said, standing up. Before your time runs out, tell the boys what you told me today, about being afraid. They need to hear that their father's weakness wasn't their fault." Richard nodded, struggling to his feet. "Will you be there when I do?" "I've been there for everything else," she replied. "No reason to stop now." As they gathered their gardening tools, Diana caught a glimpse of movement in the kitchen window. Christopher watching them, his artist's eyes missing nothing. She wondered what he saw, two older people working in a garden, or the shadows of a younger couple who'd once planted roses and dreams in this same soil. "Diana," Richard said as he prepared to leave, "thank you. Not for forgiving me. I know that's not possible. But for raising 3 incredible men, for being stronger than I could ever be, for growing roses even after the thorns cut deep." She watched him walk away, this man who had broken her heart and was now breaking in different ways. The garden around her testified to life's persistence, how beauty could grow from abandonment, how strength could bloom in damaged soil, how love, like her roses, could survive even the harshest seasons. Inside, she knew her sons were waiting. They'd want to know what their father had said, what it meant, how to feel about it. She'd tell them the truth, that healing, like gardening, takes time, patience, and the courage to keep planting seeds, even when you're not sure what will grow. The emergency room's harsh fluorescent lights cast strange shadows as Peter paced the waiting area. His brothers sat nearby, Alan typing furiously on his laptop, his way of coping with stress, while Christopher sketched absently in his notebook, dark lines revealing his anxiety. Diana rushed in, still wearing her gardening clothes. "What happened?" "Dad collapsed during our lunch meeting," Peter explained, medical training keeping his voice steady. "His doctors warned this might happen, but seeing it..." He trailed off, remembering how Richard's face had gone pale, how he'd reached for the table but missed. The past 3 months had created a delicate routine. Weekly family dinners, careful conversations, small steps toward understanding. Richard had attended Peter's research presentation, visited Alan's startup office, even bought one of Christopher's paintings. But now time seemed to be running out faster than they'd planned. A doctor appeared, looking tired but professional. "Are you Richard Chen's family?" "Yes," they answered in unison, a moment that would have been funny under different circumstances. "He's stabilized, but the tumor is growing more aggressively than we'd hoped. We need to discuss options." Inside Richard's room, machines beeped steadily. He looked small in the hospital bed, vulnerable in a way that shook his son's perception of him. The mighty tech billionaire, brought low by something money couldn't fix. "I'm sorry," he said weakly. "This wasn't how I wanted today to go. Peter, the investment papers." "Stop," Peter interrupted. "The business can wait." Christopher moved closer to the bed, his artist's eye noting how the hospital lights highlighted every line in his father's face. "Why didn't you tell us it was getting worse?" "Because you were just starting to trust me again," Richard admitted. "I didn't want to rush things, to make you feel pressured by time." Alan closed his laptop, something he rarely did. "That wasn't your decision to make. We deserve to know." Diana watched from the doorway, seeing not the man who'd abandoned them, but someone fighting to make amends before it was too late. The boy's anger was different now, not at his leaving, but at the possibility of losing him again, just when they'd started to rebuild. "Your mother was right," Richard said, looking at each of his sons. "I need to tell you something. The real reason I left wasn't ambition, not really, it was fear." I was terrified of failing you, of not being the father you deserved. So I ran away to prove myself, thinking success would make me worthy. Instead, I proved I was exactly what I feared, a failure as a father. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors. Christopher's pencil stilled on his paper. Alan's fingers stopped their restless tapping. Peter stood straighter, doctor mode falling away. You weren't a failure, Christopher said suddenly. You were human. Scared. Stupid, but human. Coming from the son who'd fought hardest against forgiveness, the words carried special weight. Richard's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve your understanding. Maybe not, Alan agreed. But you're getting it anyway, because that's what Mom taught us, to be better than our hurts. Peter checked the medical charts hanging by the bed, professional mask slipping. The new treatment options. No, Richard interrupted. No more treatments. I want to spend whatever time I have left really knowing my sons, not fighting a losing battle in hospital rooms. Diana stepped forward then, mother's instinct overriding old wounds. We'll take you home. To the house. The boys can take turns staying, and I'll be there to help. Her offer shocked everyone, especially Richard. Diana, you don't have to. I'm not doing it for you, she said firmly. I'm doing it for them. They deserve a chance to know their father, really know him before she didn't finish the sentence. The boys exchanged looks, years of wordless communication passing between them. Peter nodded first, then Alan, and finally Christopher. We'll need to set up medical equipment, Peter said, already planning. I can work from home, Alan added. I'll move my studio to the garage, Christopher offered. Richard looked at his family, the one he'd left and the one they'd become without him, and felt something he'd searched for in business deals and bank accounts. Peace. As evening fell, the hospital room filled with quiet conversation. The boys shared stories Richard had missed, not to hurt him but to include him. Diana brought coffee and stayed, adding details to their memories, helping build bridges across the years of absence. Outside the window, city lights blinked on one by one like stars emerging. Inside, a family faced not just past hurts but future loss, choosing to embrace both the pain and the healing, the anger and the forgiveness, the time lost and the moments remaining. Sometimes, Christopher reflected as he sketched his father's tired smile, the hardest storms bring the deepest peace. And sometimes, the bravest thing isn't running away or even coming back. It's staying present in the difficult moments, letting love grow in the broken places. The autumn leaves danced outside the living room window of the family home, where Richard now spent his days surrounded by the life he'd once abandoned. 6 months had passed since his hospital stay, each day a precious gift filled with small moments of healing and understanding. The house had transformed. Peter's medical equipment occupied one corner of the living room, allowing him to monitor his father's condition while working on his research. Alan had set up a small office in the den, his startup thriving under his split attention. Christopher's artwork now filled the walls, including a striking family portrait he'd finally finished, all of them together, past and present, merging on canvas. Diana moved through the house with quiet efficiency, her nurturing nature extending even to her former husband. Not out of lingering love, but from a deeper understanding of what their sons needed. Remember when we used to have Sunday brunches here? Richard asked one morning, watching Diana make pancakes, still remembering how each son liked them different. The boys would race down the stairs, she smiled, flipping a pancake. Peter always wanted blueberries, Alan plain with extra syrup, and Christopher. Chocolate chips, they said together, sharing a moment of bittersweet remembrance. The sound of footsteps interrupted them, their sons arriving for their daily visit. Over the months, these visits had evolved from obligation to genuine desire to be present, to understand, to forgive. Christopher set up his easel by the window, capturing the changing light. Dad, tell us about your first computer program. The one that started everything. Richard's eyes lit up, though his voice was weaker now. It was nothing special, just a simple game. But it taught me that creating something from nothing was possible. Like Mom did with us, Alan observed, settling into his usual spot on the couch. Created something beautiful from a broken situation. Peter checked his father's vitals, a routine that had become almost sacred. Your numbers are holding steady today. The family fell into their new normal, sharing stories, asking questions they'd once been afraid to voice, building bridges across the years of silence. Richard talked about his fears, his regrets, his pride in the men his sons had become. The boys shared their own journeys, the hard times, the triumphs, the moments when they'd needed a father most. Diana watched it all, her heart both heavy and light. "I'm going to make lunch," she announced, but Richard's voice stopped her. "Wait. I need to say something." He struggled to sit up straighter. "These past months, you've all given me a gift I don't deserve. The chance to know my sons, to understand the amazing woman who raised them. I came back hoping to make amends, but you've given me so much more. You've taught me what real wealth is." Christopher put down his paintbrush. "We learned that from Mom. She showed us that love is stronger than abandonment, that family isn't about money or success. It's about showing up," Alan added, "every day for the hard stuff and the good stuff." Peter squeezed his father's shoulder. "It's about forgiveness too, not forgetting, but choosing to move forward." Diana felt tears in her eyes. "It's about growth," she said softly. "Like my roses, sometimes the most beautiful blooms come after the hardest winters." As the afternoon light filled the room, Richard looked at his family, really looked at them. At Peter, the healer, who'd learned to fix hearts as well as bodies. At Alan, the builder, creating connections instead of walls. At Christopher, the artist, turning pain into beauty. And at Diana, the foundation, who'd taught their sons that love was stronger than hurt. "I thought I had to leave to become someone worthy of you," he said. "But you were all already everything I could have hoped to be." The boys gathered closer, understanding that these moments were precious and numbered. Christopher started a new sketch, capturing this scene. Alan set aside his phone, fully present. Peter held his father's hand, doctor's distance forgotten. Diana brought them all coffee, made exactly how they liked it, habits of love she'd never forgotten. The family sat together, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments, building new memories to carry forward. Outside, the autumn wind stirred the leaves, nature's reminder that all seasons change. Inside, a family had found their way to healing, not despite their wounds, but because of them. They'd learned that sometimes the longest journeys lead us right back home, and that forgiveness, like love, grows stronger in the tending. Richard watched his sons, memorizing their faces, their voices, their forgiveness. He saw in them everything he'd chased and everything he'd left behind. In the end, his greatest legacy wasn't his wealth or his companies, but these moments of grace, these bridges rebuilt, these hearts opened wide enough to let love heal what time had broken. As evening approached, the family remained together, holding space for both joy and sorrow, for endings and new beginnings. They had learned that sometimes the most powerful words aren't "I'm sorry" or "I forgive you," but simply "I'm here." And in being here, in choosing to stay, they had found something stronger than the past. They had found their way home.